Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So today we're doing something a little bit different. Today we are doing something a little bit different, okay? Because yes, this weekend is in fact Batman weekend. And don't worry, I've got you covered, okay? We're going to see a lot of great Batman content on this channel. But before we dive into the Batman and all of the previous Batmen, as we will be in the coming week, I thought it'd be fun to take a break from all the dark, gritty seriousness and dive into my little not so guilty pleasure that is Love is Blind. That is Netflix's 2020 sensation, Love is Blind. The show is back for a season 2 and it's just as messy as season 1, if not more so. If not more so. I have a lot to get off my chest, okay? So this video is really about therapy. This video is about venting to you guys about the nonsense that I've just watched over the last 3 weeks. We'll talk about that in a second. 3 weeks for some reason. So yeah, let's dive into it, shall we? Let's just have a casual chat about the mess, about the nonsense that is Love is Blind, and why even after the heartache that I've just been through, I'm still obsessed with the show. So first off, before starting with each of the couples, we are going to be talking about that 3-week situation. Netflix, what's going on? Netflix, what is going on? Like, I have noticed that various streaming platforms have decided to shake things up when it comes to their release schedules, and Netflix, the pioneer of binge watching, you know, dropping all 10 episodes of a series all in one day so that people could binge it over the weekend, they have decided to divest from that model, and they are increasingly experimenting themselves with how they release these shows. And in the case of Love is Blind season 2, they decided to release half of the episodes on one day and then the other half the next week later, and then the week following we got the reunion episode. And it's just annoying because of course they want you to stay on, you know, they want you to stick to watching Love is Blind for as long as possible, so you'll stay subscribed to Netflix for as long as possible. But in this case it doesn't even really make sense because it all happened within 3 weeks. So if you wanted to subscribe for just Love is Blind season 2, you'd only need a 1-month subscription to Netflix, and then you could quickly cancel after. You could quickly cancel after the reunion. So I don't understand the point of that structure. I guess it gives a chance for people to kind of catch up on season 2 of Love is Blind by the time that the reunion rolls around. But still, it's like the whole point of these like different release strategies is to ensure that subscribers stay on, okay, that they don't go off the platform for as long as possible. And so that's why they're starting to roll things out weekly, or perhaps they'll have a part 1 and a part 2. I'll make a whole video of it soon. But in the case of Love is Blind, it all happened within 1 month. So you could have just signed on for Love is Blind season 2 and then quickly unsubscribed afterwards. Although at this point, who's unsubscribing from Netflix? Netflix has a chokehold on all of our wallets. So it's at this point, before we get into the individual couples, just a friendly little reminder that if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And especially if you're a Batman fan, because I've got some Batman content coming your way. But without further ado, let's get into the couples of Love is Blind season 2. We're starting off with Shaina and Kyle because they're the most irrelevant. Like, who really cares about them? Especially by the end of season 2, like they became far into the past that no one really cared about them. But we're just going to touch on them here because they are part of one of several different love squares that occurred in season 2, with Shaina somehow falling for Shayne in the pods, okay, whilst at the same time also hanging out with Kyle and feeling some connection with Kyle. But that all broke down. We'll talk about it in a second, but let's just address the Shaina and Shayne situation. First of all, the names alone. The names alone, the poor kids, if they ever had children, how incredibly confusing. The names alone, Shaina and Shayne, please, what a headache. Anyway, secondly, I think, even though I have many thoughts about each of these people, I think ultimately they did stand the best chance of coming out of this process as a happy couple because I find them equally annoying for similar reasons. And so in my mind, they have a lot in common. They have a lot in common. So I'm thinking, actually, on paper, it would have made sense for them to end up together. And it kind of makes sense that Shayna was like lusting over Shayne, because he seems like he would be the type that she would go for. So I was actually perplexed that Shayne fell so deeply in love with Natalie, because I thought for sure that he would pick Shayna. I certainly think that if it was the real world and he could have seen Shayna and Natalie, he definitely would have picked Shayna. Again, this is just based off of what I've seen from the series. I'm not trying to judge these people's personalities in real life because I don't know them. But yeah, from what I saw, it felt like they would have been a better fit anyway. So I was surprised that he went with Natalie, although it felt like he immediately regretted it, as was shown in the footage in the reunion, where, you know, Shayna goes back to him and has a talk with him after finding out that he asked Natalie to be his girlfriend. Side note, this isn't Love is Blind, so let's become boyfriend and girlfriend. This is Love is Blind, so let's get married. I never understood that. He literally asked Natalie, like, oh, do you want to be my girlfriend? I was like, I was expecting a proposal. What show am I watching again? That he didn't understand the assignment on that front. But Shayna comes bounding in after she finds out that Shayne asked Natalie to be his girlfriend, and she's like, oh, well, you know, I had some thoughts, and, you know, I really like you, and blah blah blah, trying to rock his world just as he made his decision. And he was like, oh, I wish you'd come to me 2 days later. That's not what you want to hear from your fiance or your boyfriend. That is not what you want to hear from your new boyfriend, him saying to another woman, like, oh, if it had only been 2 days earlier, I definitely would have picked you. Like, that sucked. Okay, that was an awful show from Shayne, although it wouldn't be the last one. But yeah, Shayna was dirty for doing that. Like, Shayna was like really crappy for doing that, going back to Shayne and trying to ruin things. And get this, in the reunion, it's revealed that she told Natalie that she had actually gone to tell Shayne that she was okay with them being together, that she was fine, and she was pulling herself out from the rat race, I guess. Although again, why does that exist? Why was anyone attracted to this man? Anyways, but yeah, she literally lied to Natalie, and in the reunion she had egg on her face because everyone saw the footage. She was literally caught in 4K lying about what had actually happened in the pods, and Natalie's looking at her like, interesting, you told me that you'd gone there to surrender, but that doesn't look like a surrender to me. Like, imagine how embarrassing. So yeah, that whole drama surrounding Shayna and Shayne was, you know, a bit of a roller coaster. Great TV, especially, you know, afterwards, even in person, she tried to, you know, get a hold of Shayne. She was talking to Shayne, you know, trying to create some doubt in his mind about Natalie. I mean, she was really a spiteful person. And what's weird is that in the reunion, she was like, oh, I wish I had been more forthright. Like, I wish I had been more honest about my intentions and what I wanted when it came to Shayne. And I was like, is that really the problem? Is that really the lesson that you took away from this? Because looking at the footage, it seemed like you were pretty forthright, my girl. It seemed like you'd actually, you know, crossed a couple of lines when it came to expressing your emotions and your interest in Shayne, because after he had made that decision that to choose Natalie to propose to her, it should have been the end of it. Like, it should have been a done deal, and you should have just backed off. But anyways, ultimately Shayne did stick to his guns, surprisingly, and he did choose Natalie over Shayna, and so she was left with Kyle. And that's exactly the dynamic of their relationship. Like, she was left with him. Okay, she was lucky to have a plan B, and she was left with that plan B, and she was like so reluctant to be with him the whole time. You know, a part of me felt bad for Kyle because, you know, he was the, what was his name, the Michael of the previous season, where, you know, Michael and Jessica, I can't remember his actual name, but you know, that whole drama of the previous season with Jessica. It felt like Kyle was part 2 of that. But in reality, you know, seeing Shayna literally withdraw, like from the second she said yes and she saw him, she literally withdrew. It was just so clear that she was was reluctant to be there. Now, Kyle said that like there was a lot of the bonding and the connection that they made together that wasn't shown on the series, and like fair enough, if he feels that there was something there that wasn't shown on the show, then you know, perhaps I could give him a little bit more credit. But from what we saw, from the way that it was edited and put together, it was very clear that Shayna was withdrawing. I mean, she literally left Mexico. Like, you can't make that stuff up, right? Like, she literally left Mexico. That's not because of the editing team that we saw that. It's just a decision that she made because she literally couldn't stand to be there with him. Then, of course, you have the reasoning, the excuse that she came up with when it came to withdrawing from Kyle. And her reasoning was the classic, the famous, I'm a Christian. Okay, because Kyle is an atheist, I believe, or he was agnostic, just not religious, like not particularly religious. And you know, Shayna decided, listen, I am a holy woman, I'm a woman of Christ, and I can't be with a man who is not religious like I am. And at this point I was so confused and perplexed, and like, Shayna, you're embarrassing yourself. Like, you're embarrassing all women everywhere, Shayna. What are you talking about? We all see through that BS, because first of all, if you are a true devout woman, if you are a true, you know, strict Orthodox Christian like you claim you are, then why on earth are you on this show? Why on earth are you on a show where you know it's a possibility you could be paired with anyone from any faith or any religious background or lack thereof, and you could be expected to marry that person should things go well? Why would you put yourself in that situation if you know that you are devoutly religious? Like, what? Like, what's going on? That's not making sense, right? And secondly, why didn't you just say no to him? I mean, this is something that they touch on in the reunion, but Shayna admits that she should have just said no to Kyle in light of how religious she is. But in reality, we all know the real reason why Shayna withdrew is because she already had doubts when it came to Shayne and Kyle. She much preferred Shayne, but she chose Kyle as her plan B. But when she saw him in person, she probably just didn't find him physically attractive. Like, she probably wasn't into his look, and so yeah, she was just like, oh, I can't see myself marrying this person, so let me make up a reason so I don't look like a cruel, evil person, like a Jessica, basically. And that's what she did. She just kind of stuck to her guns about the religion thing, even though it didn't really make sense. So that's Kyle and Shayna. I'm glad they were kind of dispensed of early on in the season, because I didn't want to follow that story until the end. It wasn't going anywhere. So yeah, that's them done. So in the interest of getting rid of the boring couples first, next we have Nick and Danielle. So this was like an interesting pairing. I remember when the series first started, I was really into Nick and Danielle. I had hope for them. I was like, oh, they look like a really great couple. I'm kind of rooting for them. Danielle has a really interesting story. Nick was with Danielle. Like, like I was intrigued and I was somewhat invested. But then as time went on, I had bigger and bigger questions, and that's just how the show is designed, right? Like, as we find out more about each of these couples and them as individuals, you start to have those questions be raised a little bit more, especially in the different contexts outside of the pods. And I think the big kind of waving red flag number one that we got was when Danielle had her first kind of serious emotional breakdown on the show, and that was basically when she was ill in Mexico and wasn't able to go to the kind of you know, in-person meetup that they had. All of the contestants finally got to see the other contestants of the opposite sex in person for the first time, and Danielle couldn't go to that event because she was feeling sick. But because of the severe kind of anxiety and the severe just distress that she had, it turned into like a full emotional breakdown for her. And this was a real test for Nick to see see like what it means to have a partner who does suffer from emotional distress and severe anxiety, and also low self-esteem. Like, I'm not a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination or a psychiatrist, but I could just see that Danielle has like intense anxiety, and also has some serious self-esteem issues. And this was the first time that we got to see how Nick would deal with that in reality. And in that episode, Nick was being like such a stirrer. He was being such a stirrer. He was downstairs talking to Jarrett, being like, Jarrett, why don't you go over there and talk to Mallory, like trying to stir things up. Nick, were you tipped off by the producers? What's going on there? Like, it was real sus behavior. But he was trying to stir things up at first, and then he went up to Danielle after about 3 hours, and he was ready to like talk gossip. Like, he was ready to gossip with her, thinking that she would be on the same page, but she absolutely was not. And they had their first lovers quarrel, and it was quite dramatic. And I feel like Nick was kind of thrown off guard because of how distressed she was, not really expecting that it would be to that extent. And I don't think he handled it particularly well, but I must admit, like, I was also taken off guard, and I can't testify to how I would have reacted as well, because it was just shocking. Like, the vibe was just completely different. Nick is thinking like, oh, she's sick, but she'll understand if I'm downstairs hanging out for 3 hours with everyone on the show. And Danielle's thinking like, why is he away for so long? 3 hours is so long. And, you know, and I guess there's like a middle ground there where perhaps he could have texted her or called her during those 3 hours that he was downstairs instead of shit stirring, which is what he was actually doing. But I do think that both of them came away with stuff to learn, stuff to develop there. And after that, I started to see a little bit of the shine from their relationship kind of dull. And several incidents like this happened, where, you know, I didn't want to judge Danielle too harshly, because it seems as though there are some serious anxiety, like legitimate mental health issues going on there when it comes to her emotional breakdowns and some of the ways that she reacts to Nick's behavior. So I didn't want to like sit here and judge her and be like, she's being ridiculous. But I do feel like if this is the case, that she is going to react in certain ways to some things that Nick does, out of the sense of, you know, lack of self-esteem and insecurity, I think she needs to work on that. I do think that it's not enough to just have that as an excuse forever. We need to see, or they need to see, some development and some improvement on that, some coping mechanisms, you know, perhaps some CBT, some cognitive behavioral therapy, to improve upon that, so that it's not as much of an issue in the future. It might always be there with her, but at least if she's doing the work, then they can, you know, work towards a better future for her, so that it won't impact their relationship in such a negative way. But then on the other side of things, you know, Nick knows the woman that he married. He knows now what he kind of has in store for him and for their relationship, and he needs to exercise patience. Like, he needs to understand that this is how Danielle is, and there are certain times where he might be thrown in for a loop at how she reacts to certain things that he does, and he just needs to be able to explain things calmly, and understand, like, as he said in the reunion, that he can't always fix everything. He can't always just, you know, find logic or reason in Danielle's reactions, because anxiety is void of logic and void of reason. Like, you could sit there and say, it doesn't make sense that I feel this way, but at the end of the day, you still feel that way. So Nick needs to kind of understand that, and it seems as though that they are making active moves to improve their reactions, so that it won't have such a negative impact in their relationship, because they did reveal that they're going to couples counseling, which I think is a really great step for them. So yeah, I'm happy for Nick and Danielle. Like, everything's great there. It was a rocky road, but ultimately I think it does make sense that they ended up together. I will say the big surprise for me when it came to Nick and Danielle came near the end of the series, where we got to see a sneak peek of Danielle's flat, like her apartment, as well as Nick's, and they were clearly very different. Nick was very organized, very, you know, boring adult, and Danielle was just like living like a frat boy, living like a whole frat boy. I was was very confused. I was baffled, and especially when she was like, me and my friends might break furniture on occasion. I was with Nick on this one. I was like, no, what do you mean? Like, sis, like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Like, we're not breaking furniture left, right, and center. I'm not popping onto, you know, the IKEA website every week because you've broken my coffee table. That's not happening. Like, you and your friends need to reel it in, okay? Especially because they're in the, like, very late 20s / early 30s. There's no reason for this behavior. There's no reason for this behavior. You know, just disregarding the fact that they just got married, it needs to end now. And another thing as well, when it came to Nick, was his family. Nick's family, interesting. Nick's interesting. That was, I'm not gonna make fun of a man's family. Like, that's not what's happening here, okay? But all I will say is I did not expect Nick to have been produced from that household. I never would have guessed it. Never, ever would have guessed it. Wow. Okay, so next up we have Mallory and Salvador. Now, I was very surprised by the end of this story. I might be the only one, but I did actually expect them to get married. I felt like the exploration of their issues, it didn't feel like they were very deep-seated issues. It felt like they were inconveniences or stuff that they needed to work out, but it didn't feel like it was something that would get in the way of them getting married. And secondly, if they weren't going to get married in the end, I didn't think that it would be Sal who said no. I think it's very interesting that he went first and Mallory went second. And so, you know, she said that she wasn't sure what she would have ended up saying at the altar, but he ended up saying no, and I was kind of surprised by that. I was like, Sal, because I thought that he was like deeply in love with Mallory, and even though there were red flags along the way, he was kind of blinded by his love and affection towards her, and he seemed very like dedicated, especially when he was talking to Mallory's, I think it was her sister, her family member. So I was kind of surprised when he ended up saying no, although I'm happy for him because there were some really big issues. But it seems as though in the reunion, at least, Sal was, you know, very respectful. He didn't reveal too much of what happened behind the scenes, but he did suggest that there were bigger things going on, and that he said that he didn't feel heard in their discussions, in their arguments. So yeah, I do think that there was more going on, and that's why he ultimately said no. And good for him, you know, if that is the case, then good for him for saying no. Mallory was an interesting one. She was yet another one who was tied up in a love square, this time with Jarrett. So, you know, Mallory and Jarrett, they had, you know, quite the bond in the pods, where, you know, Jarrett seemed like he was getting along really well with Mallory, and in fact, she was his first choice when it came to making the proposal, when it came to popping the question. But Mallory was also very much into Salvador, and I think in that instance it was a case of culture, perhaps. I think it was a case of culture where she thought, you know, not only do I get along with this guy generally, and he seems like a really cool guy that we could build a really great relationship together, but also he's from a similar culture to me, so it would be like easier, not easy, but easier, you know, that familiarity of being from a similar culture, I think very much helped in the case of Salvador, whereas Jarrett it may have been more of a learning curve on his front, you know, something worth learning, but still she kind of fell into that ease, that comfort, I think, with Sal. So when the time came that Jarrett popped the question, she actually had Sal as her number one, and she refused Jarrett, and almost immediately regretted it. Almost immediately regretted it. Jarrett was like beside himself. Jarrett was so upset, like he was crying, he was so distressed. And then there was this like bit where you see Jarrett being so distressed, and then you see Sal kind of smiling. I don't think that was necessarily the same event that was filmed together. I think that's some tricky little editing there, because I don't believe Sal to be such an evil person where he would see Jarrett like crying his eyes out, getting so upset, and just sit there smiling, like sit there grinning. I don't think that's what happened in reality. I think that was some like cheeky little editing, okay? But still, Jarrett was like really upset, and then he kind of wiped away his tears. He wiped away his tears and he's like, right, time to get to the next one, like like time to get to my plan B. I can't believe this worked. To this day, I can't believe this worked. You know, he went off to propose to Iyanna, and she said yes, and she did know afterwards that Mallory had been his number one, that he had proposed to her first, and she had said no, and so Iyanna ended up being his plan B, and that was something that was kind of turning on her mind throughout the series. As you can imagine, like that's not going to make anyone feel particularly great if your fiance has revealed to you that, you know, he chose another woman first. He chose another woman and then she rejected him, and that's the only reason why he turned to you. But I feel like that's something that they worked through. That's something that, you know, Iyanna came to accept in their relationship. Again, I can't relate, but you know, she seems like she accepted it and she was ready to move on to greater things in their relationship. So, you know, fine. And also Vanessa Lachey, you know, in the reunion made a really good point where she was like, listen, I wasn't Nick's first wife, you know, like I was also second to come along in his life and to marry him, and we're still, you know, married, we're very happy together, and so yeah, it can work even if you're not the first. And I thought that was a really good point, Vanessa. Like I respected that. Vanessa was fire in the reunion, okay, but we'll talk about it more later. But yeah, so I respected that point, and I think it was a decent point. It's not exactly the same context, because here it's like in quick succession where one said no and then he was like, okay, I'm sad about that, but let's move on to the next one. But still, I do get her point of like being second doesn't necessarily mean that their relationship is going to be inferior in the long run. But anyways, I was talking about Mallory and Salvador. Let me go back to them for a second. But yeah, ultimately they didn't end up getting married, and I was quite surprised by that. I think what really did it was, first of all, the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, perhaps, but also that moment where Mallory and Jarrett had that conversation in Mexico that was just so out of line. That was just so out of pocket. I can't believe Iyanna let that stand. I can't believe that. That's crazy. That was so obviously a flirtatious exchange. Like Mallory's whole demeanor changed. Like when she was talking to Salvador, it felt like she was talking to a friend. It felt like she was talking to a buddy, a pal. But when she was talking to Jarrett, she turned up the flirtatiousness. She turned up the Hispanic, you know, female kind of draw. Like she was a completely different person. I have eyes. I can see what's going on here. Okay, she was touching his leg under the table. You're telling me? And then Jarrett was like, it's a joke. What? No. Absolutely not. After you have proposed to another woman, you're doing this and you're calling it a bad joke. Please try another one. Please pull the other leg. Please. That was such a lie. I can't believe he still lied even in the reunion. I can't believe that. And I can't believe Iyanna accepted that as well, because Salvador was just like, oh, joke, eh? Okay, let me drop this. He was very gracious. He was like, let me drop this. I don't want to start any drama on TV. But yeah, that wasn't a joke. That was a flirtatious move. Both of them knew exactly what they were doing. They were leaning in, and Jarrett even had the audacity to be like, oh, like I wouldn't have gotten you a silver ring. I would have gotten you a gold ring like you wanted. You mean the gold ring that you ended up giving to Iyanna? Please. But I'm so angry. I'm so angry. And what I really hated as well, and this goes to not just Mallory, but some other repeating offenders on the show, is the gaslighting. Now, I know that gaslighting has become like a, SJW kind of word that's used on the internet, but it is a legitimate issue. Like, it is a legitimate red flag when you know something to be true. You know what you've seen with your peepers, with your own two eyes, and someone is trying to convince you that you're just crazy, that you're blowing things out of proportion, that you're not making sense, you don't know what you're talking about. And Mallory did some of that with Sal, where he saw very clearly what was going on between her and Jarrett, and she made it seem like, oh, like it wasn't that, or she tried to turn it into, something about the ring specifically. She was just like evading it instead of being honest and saying, you know what, like, I just had a moment there where I forgot where I was, I forgot who I was, I forgot that I'm committed to you. That's not great. That's not great. And I was just kind of in shock at seeing him in person, but in reality, I choose you. Like, I choose you no matter what. He should have just been a bit more honest, as opposed to trying to make it seem like what he saw was just a completely different mirage that he created in his mind because of the Mexican heat, and in reality they've just been talking as friends with Iyanna there somehow, even though she wasn't. But again, even with all of that, I was still really surprised that Sal ended up saying no, because he kept being so romantic towards Mallory. He was singing those songs for her. I found that to be, cute, but I don't know how I would have felt if I was in Mallory's position. I would have just stood there awkwardly, kind of. I don't know what that says about me, but I wasn't the biggest fan of the singing and the ukulele playing. It would have just made me feel so awkward. So yeah, anyways, but he was showing his affections for her, He was trying to be the kind of man that she doesn't usually associate with. I feel like Mallory has a specific type that have hurt her before, and she was trying to steer in a different direction. Along with the cultural similarities, she also wanted to steer clear of the type that she usually goes for, perhaps the Jarretts that she usually goes for, and so that's what kind of persuaded her to try things out with Sal. But ultimately that wasn't enough, just to kind of try and avoid her past, to run away from her past, in order to establish a solid foundation for her future with him. Okay, so next up, since we're already on the topic, let's talk about Iyanna and Jarrett. So I feel like the producers, the Love is Blind producers, wanted Iyanna and Jarrett to be the Lauren and Cameron of season 2. They wanted them to have that kind of role, that kind of couple that everyone gets behind for season 2, but they failed. They failed for several reasons, okay? First of all, whilst Iyanna is a very likable, very endearing woman, just like Lauren was, I don't think that Jarrett was anywhere near as likable, anywhere near as endearing as Cameron was. The key difference is that Cameron was devoted to his fiancée, okay? That Cameron was committed to his fiancée from day one. That is the difference, okay? And he showed it every single episode. And the key differences when it came to Lauren and Cameron were Lauren's reservations, to do with like marriage and children and stuff, and her feeling anxious about that, and also the kind of interracial aspect of their relationship, and exploring the fact that Lauren's father and her parents would have preferred her to be with a black man. But that was the kind of crux of their story, whereas in the case of Iyanna and Jarrett, there were like actual serious issues actual serious issues, most of which coming from Jarrett, so that did not help to endear him to the audience. So I already touched on problem number one when it came to Jarrett, and that was that Iyanna was his plan B, like his second choice in the show. And it's not his fault, he can't help who he falls in love with in the pods. So it's not his fault entirely. He did try to propose to Mallory, but she rejected him. And he seemed like he did have some genuine feelings towards Iyanna, so he wanted to take a chance and, you know, ask her to marry him as well. The fact that she said yes kind of breaks my heart. The fact that she said yes kind of tore my heart into pieces. But yeah, like, even though I think it was a scummy thing to do, I think it would have been better to try and explore his relationship with Iyanna outside of the show and not force her into, well, not force her, but like persuade her into marriage during this process. It didn't have to be during this process. Like, they can have a life outside of the show and explore their options outside of the show. So if he thought that Iyanna was his second choice, why not do that? You know, take it away from all of the cameras and the pressure and see what's there in real life. But no, he decided to just cram it all into the show, and it didn't seem like he was a clout chaser. Like, he didn't seem like he was trying to sell something to the audience, unlike some people, which we'll talk about in a second. So it was just weird that he tried to like force it in this series, but alas, that's what he decided to do. And obviously Iyanna was left with a lot of insecurities when it came to their relationship, because she was aware that she was his second choice. And another thing that I wanted to touch on was actually the parents. I think Jarrett's parents saved him. I think Jarrett's parents saved him. Absolutely. They saved his butt. They saved his behind. Like, I don't even care. Jarrett's parents seemed really, really cool. His father is a minister, I believe, and he, oh my goodness, the speech that he gave about wanting the honor of marrying his first child, like his firstborn, to this woman, like how big of a deal it would be to him to marry them. Like, all these people in that community have asked him in the past to marry them, and he has said no. Like, the first couple that I marry must be my firstborn child and his future wife. I think that was touching. I think that was beautiful. Oh my goodness, I was teary-eyed myself. That was incredible. So yeah, Jarrett's parents are 100% solid people. I don't know how they produced a Jarrett. I don't know how the streets got to him. I don't know how they produced a Jarrett, because that household seems very, very loving, very, very wholesome from what we saw. So yeah, I was very confused that Jarrett ended up being a Jarrett. Maybe he was rebellious or something, like, I don't know. But yeah, because he acted like kind of a scumbag at times. At times I understood where he was coming from, but at times it was like, why are you here again? Why are you here again? And then of course on the flip side we had Iyanna's parents, and they're actually her adoptive parents, even though they kind of looked like they could biologically produce an Iyanna, which was interesting. But her father is so straight. You can see again, how did they produce an Iyanna? They meant biz. They weren't playing around. No jokes here, no playing around. Like, they were strict. They looked like a great couple, and they looked very loving and caring and compassionate and very, you know, religious, but they also looked like they meant business. Like, they were looking out for their child, and I appreciated that, because some of these parents are whining. But then of course you have the second issue when it came to Jarrett and Iyanna's relationship. It was not as much of a big issue, but they did have personality differences. Jarrett was more, you know, extroverted. He goes out all the time with his rowdy friends, his rowdy street gang, okay? They're going out all the time, and Iyanna prefers to stay at home, watch Netflix, read a book or whatever. She's more introverted. To which I say, how introverted could you be if you're on a TV show? Side note. Like, you're on a whole TV show exposing your whole life. She must have an extroverted part of herself at the end of the day. I think she was bigging up the introvertedness a bit too much. It's a spectrum. It's not just, you know, a dichotomy of extroverted and introverted. You can be a little bit more extroverted as an introvert, and I think she lands in that pile, because otherwise who's going on a whole national, international TV show on Netflix? Like, who's doing that? Exposing their whole lives. Who's doing that? That's like a true proper introvert suffering from like social anxiety introvert. Who's doing that? Not me. And I mention this because I do feel like this is one occasion where Iyanna could have compromised. Like, I do feel like, even though, to be clear, Jarrett was in the wrong in terms of planning to go out with his friends like he wasn't in a committed relationship, that he wasn't going to be married, okay? Planning to go out with his friends on the streets like he used to do when he was a single man. That expectation was, you know, inaccurate, okay? Not realistic whatsoever. I do think that he needed to understand that his life would change in more than one way when he became a married man. You know, having a wife is not just a prop in your household. Okay, it's not just something that you can show off about. You know, you show that you have a wife, you're desirable, you have your life set up in that way, as some men do in society. No, you also have to make some compromises. You also have to change aspects of your life to fit that marriage and to fit that commitment that you made to this other person. So I do feel like he needed to come to her side a little bit, but I also feel like she could have come to his side a little bit as well and hung out with his friends on occasion. It doesn't have to be all the time, maybe a couple of times a month, you know, a couple of times where she could get to know his friends, and just out of curiosity for the people that he's hanging out with in general. You know, I do feel like that's something that is beneficial for her to get an understanding of his social group, for them to get to know her, and for everyone to just, you know, mingle around in this, you know, nice mingling friendship sauce. Okay, so next up we have Shayne and Natalie. Now, this pairing never really made much sense to me. If I'm being honest, like, I was surprised that Shayne chose Natalie. I was surprised that Natalie chose Shayne. Imagine my shock, confusion, and bamboozlement when people were actually going after Shayne, not having seen him. Like, I know if you've seen him, blonde hair, blue eyes, Caucasian man, you know, tall, successful, it makes sense that the women would come running. Even though I didn't find him to be particularly attractive myself, but yeah, like, it made sense if you had seen him. But just hearing him, his voice is annoying as hell. I couldn't understand. Like, these women were literally falling over that voice. People kept comparing him to some celebrity called Gary Busey. Listen, I'm not American, so I don't know what those words mean, but I did look up the pictures, and yeah, like, I see the resemblance. I see the resemblance. That's kind of crazy. But yeah, there was this kind of love square between Shaina and Kyle, and Shayne and Natalie, and ultimately Shayne picked Natalie. He seemed really into her, even though I didn't really see what they had in common. I didn't really see what they bonded over. Again, it may be the editing, because we don't see all of their interactions all the time on the show, but it just seemed like a really weird match to me. Like, to me, it seemed like Natalie would have gone for someone who was, you know, confident and, you know, really likable, but a bit more mature and a bit more serious, and Shayne just seemed so immature. Like, he was like a grown baby man. He was so immature. He was kind of off hinge a little bit. Like, he was, yeah, he was kind of an odd person where his moods would switch in a second. You know, 1 second they're joking around, and then Natalie would say something that he didn't like, and his mood would just completely switch. Or like when things didn't go his way, like for example during the bachelor's party, where they were in the baseball stadium and he didn't manage to hit any of the balls, he was really like upset. And this is like to the camera crew. Like, I can imagine the camera person just being like, hold up, like, is he gonna hit me? Like, he seemed really, really genuinely angry about the fact that he had embarrassed himself in front of everyone, and everyone else was just having a fun time, you know, hitting it. And he was like, oh, I did this in college or whatever, and I'm so embarrassed, like, this is awful. And I was just like, and he was like talking about Sal, like, oh, Sal's wearing like church shoes and he managed to hit the ball. I was like, you know, don't judge a book by its cover, mate. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But his eyes looked perturbing. Like, his eyes look perturbing, I'll put it this way. So I was perplexed by this match, is my point. And I wasn't surprised that it kind of broke down, but I was surprised to see that it broke down because of a specific argument that happened off camera the night before their wedding. You know, Natalie was talking about this like big blow up that they had the night before they were supposed to get married, and before then she had been sure that she was going to say yes to Shayne. Again, I don't know why. But despite the fact that, you know, Shayne is very overly sensitive, he's triggered by everything, and also the fact that there was a clash in their personalities, because it seemed like Natalie enjoyed kind of poking fun at him, you know, like she obviously was really in love with him and really cared for him, but her way of showing affection was kind of just a little bit of bullying. A little bit of light bullying here and there. And I do agree that some of those interactions were a little bit sus. Like, Natalie, she literally called him a piece of shit at one point, and I was like, that's not that's not cute poking fun. Like, that's offensive as hell. So I was with Shayne on that like one occasion, but yeah, there was that obvious clash of personalities, because he was clearly someone who wanted words of affirmation all the time. He wanted her to boast about how much of his sexual prowess that he had. He wanted her to boast about the fact that, you know, she had him on his arm to every other woman on the show, and she didn't really do that. And so he was kind of, you know, he felt insecure by that, I guess. I'm not sure. Either way, it seemed like they weren't a great match, but ultimately what did them in was the fight that they had before the wedding. And I'm really curious to hear what that fight was about. Like, I really wanted details. For the most part, like, I was okay with the contestants being like, yeah, this happened and I don't want to talk about it on TV, and like, I respected their privacy. But when it came to that fight, I was very curious. When it came to that fight, I was like, tell us more. Like, tell us more, please. Give me specifics about what happened. I don't know why, and I'd love to believe that this is not the case. Like, I doubt that this is the case, okay? I don't want to put words in Shayne's mouth, even though I'm not the biggest fan of him, but like, was it like culturally related? Like, was the argument, do you know what I want to be very careful, but like, what was said? Because to Natalie, there were things that were said that are unforgivable, and in my mind, because of their racial and cultural differences, I'm like, what things would be unforgivable? So yeah. And also, speaking of racial differences, Shayna, let's go back to Shayna for a second here. I think that Shayna not only was interested in Shayne, and because he seemed like her type, but also she was offended by the fact that Natalie won Shayne over her. I feel like she felt it was unjust that someone like Shayne, a prize as he is presented in society, in, you know, a white majority society, like Shayne, would be won by an Asian woman. Like, I think that was an element of why Shayna was trying so hard to turn Shayne against Natalie initially there, and to try and win him, because she was like, well, I'm white and blonde and skinny and like conventionally attractive-esque. I don't want to cuss her out, but yeah, like, I'm what is epitomized in the standards of beauty today in this society. So like, how dare you choose this Asian woman instead of me? That's the vibe that I got from Shayna. But anyways, going back to the fight, I'm curious if that was an element of it. I really hope not. But if it was the case, then I completely understand why Natalie was like, certain things that you just can't get past. And I'm proud of her for making that decision for herself, even though it seems like she was really upset. Like, she, even after in the reunion, you could see that it's still deeply affected her. So yeah, it was something that she was very invested in, but unfortunately it just didn't work out, despite the fact that she even got the blessing from her parents, where I didn't expect them to change their mind so quickly, by the way, when it came to the parents. Like, at first she was really setting up the idea that she hadn't told her parents about the nature of what she was going to be doing on the show, and the fact that she was literally engaged to this person that she didn't know a week ago. They had had no clue about what was happening. And then it seemed like her mum was going to put her foot down and say, I'm not supporting this whatsoever, until they met Shayne, and Shayne changed their minds somehow. Again, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. Like, what am I not seeing, guys? Help me out. But yeah, Shayne blew them away, changed their minds, and they were okay with it in the end. Or maybe it was a show for the cameras. Maybe it was a show for the cameras. Or maybe they're the kind of like, you know, parents from, you know, Asia or Africa, where they want their child to marry a white person for the sake of standing in society and, you know, internalize racism or whatever. I completely understand that. There are people like that in my family as well. So maybe that's also the case. Yeah, whatever the reason, I was shocked by that change. And finally, this is the big one. Like, this is the one that made me want to do this video instead of just, you know, watching Love is Blind season 2, going about my day afterwards. Like, I decided to sit down here because I needed to talk about the mess, the nonsense, the gaslighting, the lies, the superficiality that was Shake and Deepti. Where do I even begin? So first of all, before we even get into the nitty-gritty here, just a quick reminder that the show we're talking about here is Love is Blind. Love is blind, not blurry, as Shake said in the reunion. It's not called Love is Blurry, it's called Love is Blind, which means you are theoretically supposed to fall in love with someone based off of their personality, based off of the information that they tell you and the emotional connection that's supposed to develop whilst you're in these pods where you can't see each other. Therefore, kind of getting rid of the visual aspect, okay, the more primal and superficial aspect of falling for someone that we see in the real dating world. That's the kind of basis of the experiment that's going on. It's a reality TV show, so keep that in mind. But that's supposed to be the idea here. So the fact that there's someone like Shake who made it through, like, there must have been so many different applicants. Think about it this way. There were so many different applicants that came to Netflix begging to be on this show, right? In the casting process. There were so many people that we saw who got through to the show but didn't make a connection with anyone else in the cast, and so they were relegated. The diverse people, the diverse folk that we saw in episode 1 of season 2, there were some plus size women and men there. There were, you know, men and women of all different cultural backgrounds there in episode 1 that we never saw again. We never saw them again, but Shake made it through. Shake made it through because he fell for Deepti. They developed an emotional connection in the pods and he asked her to marry him. And then they finally met each other in person, being able to see each other for the first time, and that's when everything just went down the crapper. That's when everything just went down the crapper because ultimately Shake was not attracted to her. Now, for both of these people, they were the first Indian person that they had dated because they were both Indian and they both previously dated white people. But in the case of Deepti, it seems like she was more open to, you know, dating someone from the same background as her culturally and racially than Shake was. I think in Shake's twisted and messed up mind and self-hating mind, his best case scenario for marrying an Indian woman would be if that woman had Eurocentric features, if she was as close to white as possible. Basically, you know, like if she was, she still embodied the Eurocentric standards of beauty, but also being Indian and having that shared heritage. I think that was the happy medium that he would have been delighted by. But in the case of Deepti, like, she does have, you know, Indian features. She is of a deeper complexion when it comes to, you know, Indian people who come in a range of different complexions, a range range of different, you know, looks and phenotypes. But in the case of, you know, what Shake desires, I feel because she doesn't have those Eurocentric features, he found her less attractive. And it's just a shame because he wasn't able to see past that. And it's an even bigger shame because he wasted Deepti's time and also mine. He wasted everyone's time. And, you know, honestly, I never bought it. Like, I never bought it when he started saying that, you know, I'm going to look past this because of the emotional connection that I've made with Deepti. I never bought that to begin with because he kept talking about this primal urge, you know, like this primal aspect of being attracted to someone based off of their looks, and to me it didn't seem like he was ever over it. So even though Vanessa in the reunion was like, well, I thought you were actually changing, I never really did, because it seemed like he was pretty set in his ways. Like, this is a man who knows what he wants at this point in terms of physical attractiveness, so I didn't think he was going to look past that. I was just hoping and praying that Deepti understood that and like recognized that in him and, you know, left him at the altar. Quite frankly, the fact that she even showed up was a gift. So yeah, let's talk about this, shall we? Let's talk about the stages of this, because there are certain incidents that really stuck out, and then apparently there are incidents behind the scenes that were even worse, that stood out even worse to other cast members. But we have, of course, the incident on the beach in Mexico when everyone met each other for the first time, and, you know, Deepti was, you know, having a look at the other men, and, you know, she was talking about it with the girls on the show. And then you have Shake, who's talking to the other guys of the show, and he's telling them that he doesn't find Deepti particularly physically attractive, and that, you know, it feels like he's with his aunt whenever he's with her. That is just like despicable. This man is despicable. And oh, I was just so angry. Whenever I saw his dumb face, I was so angry, because I was like, how could you? First of all, that woman is literally a few meters away. Like literally a few meters away, and you're talking about her like that behind her back. What a coward. And secondly, you're on a show called Love is Blind. The whole purpose is you're supposed to find an emotional connection with someone that surpasses superficiality, that surpasses the, you know, purely physical attraction that you have experienced in the real dating world. If that's not something that you can overcome, why on earth are you on this show? It's to promote his business. It's to promote his DJing business 100%, I swear to you. He did not care about this process. If he happened to be matched with, like I said, the happy medium of an Indian woman who had Eurocentric features, who was light-skinned and, you know, the epitome of, you know, Indian beauty, then he would have been fine with it. But the fact that Deepti doesn't match that definition that he has in his brain, then he was trying to stick it out for as long as possible to make a lasting impression on the show that would benefit his businesses, his DJing or whatever in the real world. Like 100% that was his plan. This is a smart man, and again, a man that is stuck in his ways. So I think that's what he decided to do. But ultimately, again, he was wasting our time, and he was wasting Deepti's time and making her look like a fool. And that was just so cowardly and so disrespectful and despicable of him to do. But then you have the wedding day. But then the next big incident in this saga would be the wedding day itself, because ultimately Deepti, decked out in this traditional Indian wedding gear, she's absolutely stunning, like absolutely incredible, and she walked down the aisle and she had already made up her mind and ultimately said no to Shake. I love the fact that she said no. I love the fact that she decided to choose herself instead of putting so much pressure on herself to get married, to fulfill this, you know, arbitrary fantasy, all while being, you know, just talked about horribly behind her back and being disrespected by this man in front of the entire frigging planet, okay, because this is a Netflix show. I love the fact that she forewent that fantasy and decided to choose herself in that moment, and the fact that her mum was like, I'm so proud of you. I was like, yes. Yes, this is a happy ever after, okay, because them ended up together would have been a tragedy, because that man is scum. He is absolute scum. And then you saw, like, during the wedding even, Shake trying to save face, telling everyone, oh, I don't know what I would have said if I had gone first. Like, I don't know if I would have said yes to her, blah, blah, blah. Please. We fast forward to the reunion. We fast forward to the reunion where Shake is just being a nuisance to everyone. How embarrassing. So he seems to have, in his mind, taken on the role of the villain, because surely, you know, he's seen the reactions that people have had online in the real world to his behavior on the show. So in his mind, he's like, okay, fine, I'm the villain. Like, I'm this season's villain. You know, it wasn't Shayna. It ended up being Shake. Like, he's this season's Jessica. So instead of, you know, trying to be remorseful, instead of apologizing profusely to Deepti as he should have been, he decided to take on the role of the co-host and villain of the reunion. And I hated every second of it. I hated every second of it. Like, Shake, shut up. He literally kept interrupting everyone. It was so annoying, because he really thought that every time he opened his mouth to say nonsense, that he was speaking on behalf of everyone in the room, that he was saying what everyone in the room was thinking and everyone in the audience was thinking. But in reality, we weren't thinking that, because he's literally just on a planet on his own. Like, his thoughts and feelings are just so far removed from reality. Okay, there were aspects of what he said that were kind of correct. For example, he is allowed to have his own preferences, even if they are rooted in internalized racism. He is allowed to have his own preferences or whatever. But the thing is that he's on Love is Blind. The thing is that he's on Love is Blind, and so the nonsense that he was talking about, you know, having physical attraction to someone, even just a little bit, blah, 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 it didn't apply here because you signed on to the show. No one held a gun to your head and forced you to come on this show, especially considering there are so many other, you know, reality TV shows out there that he could have gone on if he really wanted to promote his DJing. So it's like, why are you here if that's not something that you were open to? Why did you waste, again, Deepti's time and everyone else's time? And another thing that annoyed me about his appearance in the reunion, aside from the constant interruptions, but also the fact that he made Shayne he made Shayne look like a gentleman. How do you manage that? How do you manage making Shayne, who was also kind of a scumbag, look like an absolute saint when he's next to you? Because Shayne the whole time was like this. Shayne the whole time was like, oh man, he doesn't speak for me. Like, Shayne looked like he hated every single second of sitting next to Shake, and he deserved it, quite frankly. Yeah, like, it's just not on. And also, I just remember this. Shake had the audacity to tell Vanessa that he was attracted to her. What? So I had seen this the day before in the like sneak peek that Netflix had released on their YouTube channel. Already I was flabbergasted. I was like, this reunion is about to be insane. But then I watched it for myself. I watched it in the episode, and the lead up to it is so interesting because Vanessa is fuming. Vanessa, like, she forgot where she was. Like, she was literally like fuming. She was calling him babe, like sarcastically. She was mad. Like, Nick Lachey was just sitting there like, uh-oh, you triggered her. She was mad at Shake. Like, and honestly, it was just everyone. It was everyone in that moment. She was speaking on behalf of everyone, not him. But then he had the audacity to be like, oh, it's human nature, like, or it's like we're animals or whatever. And like, naturally, like, I'm attracted to you, Vanessa, and no one else in this room. At which point, everyone else in the room should have been like, thank God. Like, everyone else in the room should have been like, thank goodness. But also the audacity for this man, you see, like this, the audacity for this man to say that he is attracted to Vanessa when her husband is literally sitting next to her. You see how he's not right? Like, you see how, what is going, first of all, it's disrespectful to her regardless, even if she was sitting there on her own. The fact that he said that to her, really? Like, this whole time you've just been looking at her, thinking about how attractive you find her? Like, how disrespectful. But secondly, the fact that her husband is there, sitting next to her, and you're like, the only woman I find attractive in this room is Vanessa. Oh, man. All I can say is Deepti dodged a bullet. She dodged a fudging grenade with this He showed his true colors in the reunion and it was unbearable. This might be one of the few instances where the TV show's editing crew actually did Shake a favor. Like they actually did him several favors by portraying him as less insufferable throughout the show than he actually is. Because during that reunion, you know, there was obviously editing, but there were sequences that were allowed to play out and people were allowed to say their full thoughts, and having Shake there just talking out of his neck was unbearable. But now that I told you guys my thoughts on Love is Blind season 2, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.